some more into the budget presentation by the Finance Minister. Joining us is somebody who has been in his shoes before. That is former Finance Minister Terkper. It's great to have you on the marketplace as always. First off, your thoughts about yesterday's presentation? Mr. Terkper, if you can hear me, it's great to have you on the marketplace. Tell us what you think about the Finance Minister's presentation yesterday.
I think the best thing that came out of the presentation is confirmation of the weak state of the economy, in particular, the fiscal deficit, the debt situation, and others which I believe we will delve into. And look at some, further details. I say this is quite disappointing because remember that this is a government that has been the only one to benefit from the term field and Sankofa field, which accrued 100% to them. It is a government which since 2011 has benefited from nearly 57% of all the oil revenues that have flowed into the economy compared to 43%, about 57% in 3.5 years, compared to 43% for that matter, for Mills, Mahama combined in 8 years, so if you want to be generous, 6 years. A government that, by its own estimation, is going to benefit 41 billion Ghana cedis from ESLA, which should have totally paid both arrears to road contractors and the energy sector. But we are being told that government is borrowing as if you're in the banking sector, arrears. Now we are being told government is borrowing to meet these commitments. So what happened? What has happened, to the revenues that have flowed in? And this is a government that benefited from the stabilization fund with 3 oil fields without putting much into it, benefited from the sinking fund. So if with all these benefits, it wasn't a dismal economy, you are facing a situation of 77% of debt. And I don't think we should buy into the deficit being anything around 8 or 9%, because we know from Fitch, from IMF and others that our deficit is going to be around 15%. Now, let me just make one final introductory point, then we can go into some details later. If you take the debt at 77%, and granted that you are even going to use half of the 5 billion, for refinancing, and I'll be generous and therefore say that it is debt replacing debt. The additional one that will be used for budget purposes, and you were pointing out to the numbers, compensation and interest payments alone are about equal to tax revenue. So if you are going to use the additional one to pay capital, to pay, the other budget items, that is going to take our debt, considering that this is deficit financing, is going to take our debt beyond 80%. That is what this budget is telling us, that our debt by the first quarter will be about 80%. And that is just a bond, and not to talk about other, financing. So this is a dismal situation in which we find ourselves. And yet we are told that we shouldn't contemplate that we are moving towards HIPIC.
Okay. I guess also that you're making reference to the 5 billion euro bond to be issued in the first 3 months of the year, as the Finance Minister indicated in his address before Parliament yesterday. And so on the issue of debt, because it has been a topic for discussion where people are saying that it is very concerning, but at the same time, we're hearing the IMF say, well, we are able to contain it because of the size of our GDP. When it comes to the issues of our debt, what are your major concerns? Is it the fact that you think that we cannot repay these debts on time?
If you are spending, that is 2.1 of the revenue that is going to come in, 2.1 out of the 2.4% that's going to, of revenue that's going to come in on compensation, right? And on interest payments. That excludes debt service. Remember, it excludes debt service and the capital and other elements of the budget. This should tell you that we are we are going to have to sustain borrowing, to finance a substantial part of the budget. And let me give you another reason to worry. If you look at the Appendix 1A, and you couldn't project it, but if you can just refer to it, 1A, the revenue is going to be, is coming in at 13. I'm looking at the first quarter figures only, at 13.1. But remember that there are two totals there, so we don't know which is which. 13.34 and then 13.1, which is the same thing with expenditure. But if you take 13.1 and then you see that your expenditure is, as you just pointed, 23, and there is 24 there also, so we don't know which is which. Let's be generous and take it to be 23.7. You have a deficit of 10. Now, but this is a deficit of 10 before you have to go to the footnote. As usual, it has not stopped. You go to the footnote and add what I believe is an understated bank capitalization costs, and then bank bailout costs and energy costs. Those are footnotes. So you have to add them to it. But even if we grant that the deficit is 10.7, there is something very weird in this statement. You can see in the financing section on page 27 that financing from foreign alone is 28.9 Ghana cedis. You have a deficit of 10, which you want to finance. Yet your borrowing is 28.9, about 29, billion. And when you add domestic financing, which is just 3%, 3.7, you have deficits of 32, financing of 32.8. I hope that that's thanks you saying that, yeah. So you can see that, what you have there, the domestic is 28.9. Just add foreign, add domestic 3.7. That is, somewhere, domestic net 3.7. When you add the two, it is 32 by my calculation, 0.8%. Yet the deficit is supposed to be only 10.6%. What is the extra, 10 minus nearly 30, 20%? What is the 20% borrowing financing? That is the question. What is it financing? And why has it been excluded from the expenditure? Why has it been excluded from the arrears? Darrell, I hope that you follow my argument, because what you finance is your deficit. But here we are, a deficit figure which is 3 times lower in the first quarter, right? Now, if part of it is borrowing, then you better tell us that you are borrowing for the amortization, which is below the line.
Right. Which
is the point we are making, and which is the point of the minority, in Parliament, that we are heading towards broke. Because you are borrowing now heavily, to finance interest, and you are going to be borrowing. If it is not for current expenditure, and which is why it is not above the line, then that gives you a clue. Are we borrowing to refinance the budget of a debt of 20 billion?
Right. Okay. So
you follow my point? Yes.
I follow your point.
So there is something weird that needs explanation. And if that is the case, then it should have been reflected in amortization. Now, my final point. If you are unable to get this money from the market, as was the minister's caution in the first quarter, then the difference is 22.8 billion, and that's our petroleum revenues. So is our petroleum revenues at risk? Or is Bank of Ghana going to come to the aid of government again, and bail it out? This is the reality that is facing Ghanaians. And I don't think that the platitudes that are in the budget should appease us at all. Yeah.
Okay, and certainly that is major headache for anybody who is going to assume government next year as we head into the election. So let's talk about solutions. What would you suggest should be the right way to go Government seems to think we have to borrow some more to sort of deal with the challenges we have right now. What do you think is the right way to go?
Well, are you asking me because there's no proposal about how to go about it?
It's for the national interest.
The country is facing austerity, a very deep austerity. And the good thing about this is that unlike 2009, when single spine, virtually was not quantified, was virtually hidden, and therefore you come into office and then you are faced with all these gigantic things. There is some appreciation, some idea of what is ahead of the country from this. There is one item which is missing.
Which is?
The majority of free SHS students who got free SHS first are moving into tertiary. There's no mention of the cost of free SHS. I stand for correction. Is that part of the financing that has been left out? Right? And there has been no expansion. So these are the things which faces. Now, when you want to see what the MDC is capable of doing, then we could have had more graphs, but you would appreciate that we were the government that did massive investments and at the same time reduced the rate of borrowing through the smart borrowing, which I hear has just been dismissed by the vice president without coming out with any best alternative. That should give you a clue of the capability of the NDC. But this by no means says that, we are going to take an economy, which is, yes, and we are certainly going to, and we can assure Ghanaians that we are capable, of the task. Because if you come to look at our record, right, we left the money that was used for the stabilization fund. We left the money that was put into the sinking fund, which was used to redeem the balance of the Kufuor bond. I heard you saying that, is borrowing to refinance is no solution. Because remember, we borrow to refinance instead of paying down the debt, right? And what do we see? What we see is the situation today. We were the government that also put in place the infrastructure fund. President Mahama was generous when he said 270. That amount was the portion of the sovereign bond that went into seed capital for the infrastructure fund. By the time the law became operative, we had put VAT revenue into it. We had put oil revenue from the ABFA into it. Not a penny. I challenged, the MPP. Not a penny was added to that. And yet the money was spent. So you can see the sort of buffers that we were building for the country. You cannot assume that you will run a country without crisis. We came out of the global financial crisis. We came out of the disruption of gas supply from Nigeria. We came out of, the fall in crude oil prices in between 2014, 2015, for which they say the deficit, was dismal at 2.8. You wish it away, you dismiss it, and then you want Ghanaians to give you the benefit that your deficit and your growth are going to be poor on account of COVID.
But those were...
Let me just end this segment, with one thought. A lot has been blamed on COVID, which Ghanaians should not accept.
That was going to be my next point.
My reason is very simple.
Yeah.
The estimates that the government gave to the IMF and to Parliament gave the cost of COVID at 2.5 to 3%. If you add the 3% to the 5%, that's 4.9 deficit that was projected in the 2020 budget, it is only 8%. So what is accounting for the difference of 8%, which is landing us, at the end of 2020? It is the bailout cost, which has been left out of the budget. It is the energy cost, which has been left out of the budget, despite 41 billion coming to this government potentially as extra revenue. It is the understatement of, and it's an understatement, both in the media review and now, it's the understatement of compensation and the understatement of interest payments, understatement of amortization that was going to be hidden, if you remember the 2019 media review, and it was, So these are the reasons. Please let no one think that everything, the dismal situation is just an account of COVID. Please, and COVID is fully funded, by the way. COVID is funded from the IMF loan, 1 billion, which is up to our limit. COVID is funded by the World Bank loan. COVID African Development Bank, some generous support that came to the economy from development partners and from Ghanaians, and COVID is funded from the stabilization fund, which this government took without putting anything in. So let's not excuse the dismal situation of the country on COVID at all. Please, I think that this, for me, is a very important point for Ghanaians to note.
You absolutely read my mind there on your last point, because I was going to talk about the impact of COVID and for which reason, I mean, we are seeming to have some of the challenges that we are facing at this point. And on the point of austerity, we see that so many countries are also facing the same challenge because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that you should be a bit generous to government on that point.
No, there's no reason to be generous. And let me tell you why. Before COVID, there was a global financial crisis, which was supposed to be the worst crisis, if you remember, for 10 years, from 2008, or so in our context, call it 2009. So President Mills came right into global financial crisis. We inherited the single spine policy, but let me talk about the crisis, once first. Single spine is a crisis in itself because it wasn't quantified. Then we also faced serious disruption in gas supply. We coined one word and forgot about the reasons for it. Then in 2014, as I said earlier on, we faced the situation where crude oil prices dropped from the $99 average that we were expecting to $44 average. That's what we got, which, by the way, is what the current government is getting. But with 3 oil fields, we had it with only 1. Now, the reason I'm saying that I don't have to be sympathetic to this government is that they told Ghanaians that everything was non-performance. They forgot about the crisis element or deliberately left it out. Why should we excuse them? After they had even we were forced to go to the market. The minister said, has been repeating, that we did 10.75. And he always repeats it. And that's because under the IMF program, we were not even allowed the benefit of the 5% of Bank of Ghana financing.
Mr. Terkper,
we were not even allowed
to end it here, unfortunately. Our time is up. Thank you so much for your analysis and for sharing your perspective this afternoon. It's great to have you on the program. We'll continue this conversation as the former finance minister seems to think that we are facing austerity at this point. Is Ghana really broke? That's conversation for another day. This has been The Marketplace.